Welcome everyone to the Geeking Poetic channel. I'm your host Larry Roberts.
And I'm Megan Guess.
And today we're going to do another top 10 list.
This time featuring 10 of our favorite retro video games that we still love playing in 2024.
Yep, we're mainly going to be looking at games we love playing on home consoles, like Atari 2600, the Super NES, and the Sega Genesis, but there's a couple of arcade classics thrown into the mix as well.
These are the games that might be a bit old and outdated by some people's standards.
Yeah, but they're the ones we still find ourselves coming back to over and over again and still having a lot of fun with even today.
It was really tough narrowing it down to just 10 as there were so many awesome games back in the day.
So make sure you let us know in the comments below which games you think you would have included. And make sure to hit that subscribe button while you're at it, as it really helps our channel.
So without further ado, let's get into our list.
So first up on our list of favorite retro games to play today, I gotta mention the game Adventure for the 2600 or the Atari VCS. Developed by Warren Robinette and released by Atari back in 1980, it was based on the text game Colossal Cave Adventure from 1977. And it featured very simple graphics, with a small square avatar acting as yourself, going around searching various mazes and castles, all while trying to find a magical chalice, while also trying to avoid a thieving bat and some aggressive dragons that look suspiciously like digital ducks. Now you could stab them with your arrow-like sword, but you could only carry one item at a time, which was very tricky and could get really frustrating. But the gameplay was random, so you could play this game over and over again, and honestly, it just never got old for me. Now it might look about as basic as it can get by today's video game standards, and the gameplay isn't difficult to understand. But it's still a challenging game, and there's good reason why it sold so well back in the day, and it's still included in all of the Atari greatest hits and flashback systems that are released today. This is a really great game that still endures.
Okay, well, for my first entry on the list, it is also a classic game that I played on the NES back in the day, and it's still so much fun to play whether on the home system or on the arcade machine. And that game is Galaga. This Namco game was developed in the early 1980s as a sequel to Galaxian, and honestly, this is an instance where I much prefer the sequel to the original, as Galaga can be so challenging with this fast-paced gameplay and the aggressively diving enemies. Not to mention that tractor beam that can really screw you up. But I love being able to double up my ship after getting it back from the tractor beam, and I love trying to get all the ships during the challenging stage and getting all those bonus points. This was truly one of the best developed and most exciting games of the day, and it deservedly received much acclaim and awards for how great it was. Again, this is a fairly simple fixed shooter game, but I, and many like me, still find this game a whole lot of fun to play even today.
Well, since you're talking about fixed shooter games, then I gotta mention one of my favorites that I played on the Atari VCS 2600 back in the day, and that's Demon Attack. Created by the awesome game developers over at iMagic back in 1982, you control a laser cannon trying to defend the planet's surface against winged demons, who continuously morph from stage to stage with different configurations, with some getting really quick with their laser attacks, and some who'll split in half when hit and become twice the threat. Not to mention, they start diving at you, making the whole thing that much more challenging and difficult to play as the game goes on. This was definitely an anxiety-inducing game to play as a kid, and quite honestly, it still gets my pulse racing, especially as I reach the higher levels, and you can find yourself quickly running out of lives if you're not really careful. Back in the day, the whole look and design of this game was really impressive to me. It seemed like it was a step up from most of the other games that were out at the time for the 2600. Not to mention the sound effects are excellent as well. Overall, Demon Attack is just a great classic game that might be pretty straightforward, but it still looks and plays great. And honestly, I just keep coming back to this one.
On the note of games that were a step up or two from the other games at the time that I truly love, another game that really stands the test of time for me is Super Mario Bros. 3 for the NES. For a game that was developed and released in Japan in 1988 and later in the US in 1990, this game was really challenging and had a level of complexity that was unrivaled at the time. While it was a side-scroller similar in ways to its predecessors, Super Mario 3 features so many incredible new elements. such as you get to play either Mario or Luigi, and they had slide down slopes, climbing vines, and you could pick up things and throw them. New power-up features like the Tanuki suit and Super Leaf really improved the gameplay overall. And the layout of having 8 kingdoms and various subdivided levels meant that this was a game that you could spend so many countless hours playing and discovering new things. This game just never gets old even now. To date, it has sold over 17 million copies and is considered one of the greatest video games of all time, and for good reason. While most of the classic Super Mario games were fun and memorable, it goes without saying that Super Mario Bros. 3 is one of the best and most challenging games of them all. And I still love it today.
Well, one game that I didn't play on a home console as a kid, but I absolutely loved playing at the arcade was 1982's Tron. This coin-op arcade game was developed and released by Bally Midway, and it was based on the Disney movie of the same name. As a kid, I loved everything about this game, and quite frankly, I still do. The light-up 8-way joystick controller looks badass, and it handled really well. And all the games looked and played like how I would have expected them to in the Tron movie. Now, there were 4 different levels to complete, and sadly, I heard rumor that there was a 5th level that had been developed but didn't get completed in time for release because that would have made this so much better. But as it is, getting to race the light cycles, fighting against the battle tanks, and then ultimately going up against the MCP, otherwise known as the Master Control Program, in a final battle similar to the ending of the film, really brought the game to life for me. And just recently, Arcade1Up put out a modified home version of the arcade game, which is still a lot of fun to play, and it's a game that I still just get as excited about today as I ever did back then. With Tron's awesome gameplay and the graphics and the sounds, it's just a game that keeps me coming back over 40 years later, and it totally takes me back to 1982.
So one of my favorite games to play even today when visiting the arcade has to be Street Fighter 2. When Capcom released the 1991 sequel to the original Street Fighter game, they definitely made some major improvements. With more characters to choose from and awesome new moves and combinations, that really kept things interesting, and it doesn't get old. Plus, it's always my first choice of game to play when I'm at the arcade with a friend and I want to kick their ass. Because there's nothing more fun to me than having Blanca go full-on beast mode on my opponent's character and watch them suffer. And then usually I make the loser buy me drinks. But seriously, Street Fighter 2 has to be one of the most fun 2-person fighting games I've ever played, even today. The Super NES version is cool too, but they made some changes to the game when compared to the arcade version. Thankfully, when Arcade1Up released their home version a while back, that enabled people like me to be able to enjoy the proper game while in the comfort of my own home. Unfortunately, I just have to make my own drinks then.
So the next game on our list might sound like an obvious choice, but I think it is for a good reason. And that choice is Miss Pac-Man. While I enjoyed the original Pac-Man, the 1982 sequel released by Midway Games was a clear upgrade in so many ways. With new music and sound effects, and the additional warp zones, and the moving fruit, the new cutaway intermission scenes, all of it just made the game feel fresh and more fun and exciting to play. And unlike when they tried to port the original Pac-Man for home consoles, the Miss Pac-Man port for the Atari was actually quite good and very playable. Though I admit I do still generally prefer to play the arcade version more. But still, it was a nice bounce back for Atari when the home version of it turned out so good, because a lot of people were really bummed about that first Pac-Man port. It's pretty bad. And even though I've been playing Miss Pac-Man for over 40 years, I still find it really challenging, as the pursuing ghosts and maze changes with each level gets more tricky to maneuver. This is an old game I find still gets a lot of positive reaction, not just from people like me, but even from younger audiences today, because it's just a timelessly fun game to play. So Miss Pac-Man had to make my list.
Well, for me, when I was younger, I loved games that were fast, exciting, and kept you on your toes. Not to mention, if they had great graphics and sound effects, then it was a real winner for me. Well, thankfully, I got all of that and so much more when Sega came out with Sonic the Hedgehog. Basically, Sonic was Sega's response to how popular the Mario character had become for Nintendo. And seeing the need for their own brand recognizable character, they came up with Sonic. And for us kids back in the early 90s, we were blown away by this game. The graphics were amazing, and the gameplay was extremely quick and complex, especially for its time. And with the levels being so complex and challenging, it meant that you could play this game over and over and try new routes and techniques that you hadn't tried before, which meant that this game doesn't get old. They also came out with some great sequels for Sonic as well, introducing other characters like Knuckles, and even creating video pinball version, which is also a lot of fun. Sonic was the game and character that just kept on giving. And especially for its time, it was a groundbreaking game that got me hooked. And still today, I find it to be exciting and challenging to play.
Okay, so my last entry onto this list is going to be a game that I played incessantly at home on my Atari 2600, and to be honest with you, it's still my #1 go-to game, especially when I want to plug in the old Atari for some retro gaming. And that game is none other than Yars Revenge. When Howard Scott Warshaw developed this game in 1982, he really gave us something that felt like a step forward in gaming, as the overall look and smoothness of Yars Revenge gameplay felt fresh and new. And the game was simple to understand, yet it was really challenging. You try to avoid the swirling cotile launching out at you while also simultaneously trying to destroy it. The explosion screen was something super colorful and new back in 1982, and it just added to the excitement of it all. But trying to avoid that damn missile can be such a pain, and as the game advances, it just gets a lot harder. Eventually your shield starts disappearing, and then the swirl starts launching a lot faster, and it has a guided missile effect. Let's just say that if you suffer from high stress, then this may not be the best retro game for you. But everything about this game just presses all the right buttons for me, so to speak. From the look and the design of the gameplay to the box artwork and the cool comic book that they included in the box, this game just felt special to me right from day one, and that still sticks with me even today. Out of all the retro games, I would say Yars Revenge is the one that I still love playing the most, and I'm actually pretty good at it, though honestly it still really stresses me out.
Very nice. Well, for me, I say possibly the best for last because my final entry on this list is none other than Super Mario Kart for the Super NES. Look, as much as I enjoy the other Mario games, and I think they're great, there's just something so ridiculously fun about having these characters race each other on these silly go-karts and watch them crash and burn. I love racing, and I tend to have a bit of a competitive streak in me, so I get a huge kick out of playing against someone and just kicking their butt at this game. Especially when playing against someone like, I don't know, maybe my co-host here, because he is so incredibly terrible at this game. I get a huge kick out of seeing him just crash and completely fail every single time I play against him.
Yeah, okay, well, that's why I don't play this game, all right? It's bad enough that I'm terrible at Super Mario Kart, but seeing the evil pleasure you get in your eyes, just you watching me fail like that, it just makes it worse.
Well, anyhow, as everyone knows, Mario Kart has gone on to have loads of sequels and offshoots over the years on various systems. And you could do a whole video just discussing them and ranking them, and maybe we'll do that someday. But right now, for me, I have to say that the original Super Mario Kart for the Super NES will always be my favorite one. It's just so much fun, and it's chaotic and challenging and hilarious to watch. This is the one that I can just never get enough of.
So that wraps up our picks for 10 awesome retro video games from the 80s and 90s, the ones that we remember most fondly and we still love.
I'm sure there are a bunch of you out there who remember these games and love them just as much as we do. But there's also a bunch that we didn't mention that you might love even more than these.
Yeah, so whether you agree or disagree with our choices, make sure you leave your comments below and let us know what we forgot, or which ones that we did mention that you would have on your list as well.
We'd love it if you could give us a like as well as hit that subscribe button so that you can check out more of our stuff in the future.
And you can check us out on Facebook at the Geeking Squad group, as well as on TikTok and Instagram.
Thanks for watching, and we'll be back soon with more game content and other geeky stuff to talk about.
Thanks. See you later.